Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by whānau, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa, the true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury, if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are Leader of the Opportunities Party, Qiulae Wong, Labour Party MP for Manurewa, Arena Williams, and New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator, Matthew Hooton. Tonight's 1-on-1 in 10 is co-leader of Te Pāti Māori, Debbie Ngarewa-Packer, on the impact of the latest storm on whānau, the need to rebuild climate change resilience at the marae level, and the cost of living fuel crisis. And special extra 1-on-1 on 10 with former intelligence and defense policy analyst and consultant to US government security agencies, Dr. Paul Buchanan, on Trump's illegal war on Iran, Israel's role, and if this represents a terrible geopolitical blunder. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Yes, I know the comments aren't appearing. Shout out to our Wātia Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the Fourth Estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, it's week 7 of Donald's illegal war on Iran, and President Trump, after promising to erase a 7,000-year-old civilization, has announced that he will now close the Strait of Hormuz as a response to Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. The old blockade to block a blockade that wasn't blocked before being blocked strategy, none of this is reopening anything after America threw a tantrum and walked away from negotiations because Iran wouldn't provide Trump with the nuclear bomb justification for this fiasco. Donald complaining about Iran's nuclear program after ripping up Obama's plan to stop Iran's nuclear program is as rational as buying fire insurance from an arsonist. Blocking the strait because it's blocked is like sawing off your head to fix a broken foot. Meanwhile, we continue to pay an arm and a leg at the pump with no end in sight of this insanity. Talking of insanity, Trump somehow has managed to get into a public fight with the Pope. Do you know how much of an asshole you need to be to get into a fight with the Pope? It's like punching the Dalai Lama while mugging the Buddha. So angry was Trump with the Pope criticizing his war that he posted this insane image of himself as Jesus. But it gets better than that. When challenged on why he was posting himself as Jesus, Trump argued that he wasn't dressed as Jesus, but was in fact a doctor helping heal people. A doctor healing the sick. If that's true, why is the doctor dressed like Jesus? Why are there flying angels in the background? Why are people praying? And why is he healing the sick person with what looks like magical miracle light coming out of his hands? To paraphrase the life of Brian, he's not the Messiah, he's just a very stupid boy. And finally this week, a shout out to Iran's social media Lego shitposting, which has gone next level, especially the South African Iranian embassy. If nothing else, Iran has most certainly won the meme war. How bad has Trump messed up here for a theocracy to beat a democracy in the propaganda battle? The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with co-leader of Te Pāti Māori, Debbie Ngarewa-Packer, on the impact of the latest storm on the whānau, the need to build climate change resilience at the marae level, and the cost of living fuel crisis. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Debbie, I had the unpleasant experience of listening to Sean Plunkett on the platform last week. They were mocking the idea that climate change is impacting Māori more. One caller's argument was, how would the rain know how to harm Māori more? They laughed. I cringed. Could you please explain to Sean and his angry white listeners how climate change impacts Indigenous people hardest?
Yeah, no, I'd rather not. I'm not a big fan of trying to give any understanding to people who never understand our worldview.
Preach.
So I believe to put your energy when an energy crisis, I'd rather put my energy where it's best spent, which is, first of all, commending our marae, our communities, who continue to step up and continue through, I guess the unintended consequences of growing capability and showing what a tiriti-centric Aotearoa is, which is actually cares for everyone, looks after everyone. And instead of relying on emergency heroism, I wish that we could have a nation and particularly a government that recognises what it is that they do and how it is that we avoid really bad situations. And I think, we've seen this with Gabriel, we've seen this up north. There is now an amazing capacity and resilience in the fact that you could see it in the civil defence and national defence, in NEMA, emergency defence, that they know they can rely on trusted parts of the community. And they're Māori, and they do predominantly accommodate and look after people from marae spaces. And we saw it in Ōpōtiki, Wakatani, we've seen it in Tauranga, we've seen it in Taitokiro, and it just continues to stretch all weekend, where if you have to evacuate, you've got somewhere safe for you and your whānau, for you and your tamariki, and in many cases your animals and your pets. And, they've, again, stacked on crisis after crisis that they have the ability to do what Wellington can't. And so, we need it. And these aren't coincidences that there aren't deaths. It's not coincidences that people can retreat safely, not knowing what's coming and understanding we're getting to cyclone weather patterns now. And I think it's really important to recognise that capacity, invest in that capacity, and not wait for directives from government. Trust the local knowledge.
Once again, marae have opened their doors to every member of the community impacted by another climate event. How angering was it to you that this government scrapped the emergency management bill because National Act and New Zealand First didn't like the co-governance language in the bill? Marae are the very front line of the ongoing extreme weather. Why aren't they given the mana they deserve?
I think that there's just a general ignorance about Te Tiriti, and it just triggers everybody, those who don't understand what tino rangatiratanga means, those that don't enjoy the hospitality, the holistic care that that Māori and many around Aotearoa give and receive. And I think what we needed to do is understand that we should invest in these at scale. I went over to Gabriel. I saw how marae were cleaning up before anyone even arrived. And you've got to remember, the frontline emergency, the army, they need to be kept for acute situations. They need to be, and I just really can't praise the way that marae act as emergency hubs, and the fact that people are insecure by that knowledge and that general love and care for everyone is a real sad missed opportunity. But they continue to stand up, and they continue to stand up with real mana. And again, I've sort of seen some say, it wasn't as big of a cyclone. Well, the reality is, if it was, they were prepared.
Te Pāti Māori have been tireless in their criticism of this government's response for the poorest Kiwis to the fuel crisis. How on earth are whānau who are just holding on by their fingernails with the cost of living going to handle the new Treasury forecast of a possible 7.5% inflation spike if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed?
I think, first of all, what we have seen is the government has valued the voters that they connect to the most, which are not those who are struggling the most. They're not Māori communities. They're not rural communities. They're not beneficiaries. They're not, but they are racehorses. We have seen a bit of relief, woohoo, for
Sure.
the racehorsing sector. And I think what we've got now is, and I think I saw something. Don't quote me, but there was something like if you need the fuel supply for last week has gone up an extra $40. So if you were like on 43 kilometers that you had to do a week, it's now $150.
Wow.
And that is now, and I know that this government continues to talk about the middle squeezed, or the squeezed middle, sorry. What about the squeeze, beneath the middle? What about those who are carrying 2 to 3 jobs? What about those who are elderly, have worked all their lives as superannuants and need to get to hospitals and need to get to, cities
Right.
where their only grocery store is? So I think what we're seeing now is that the petrol prices, we need to have relief, and we need to see also what the phases are going to look like at the varying stages of the supply. Because remember, the supply notifications we're getting are days old.
Yes.
They're days old. So, we don't really have a true picture of what's on shore. We're really reliant on these boats getting, or ships getting through, which I think we can see through to the end of this month, but it's the following months that has got some real anxiety. So we've got petrol prices past $3, $3.40, $3.50, diesel up nearly 90%. And so, that's whānaus, that's taxpayers, New Zealand taxpayers who have whakapapa, who are choosing between kai, fuel, taking someone to school, taking someone to the doctors, and the amount of people that we have as constituents and the large Māori electorates that are choosing on whether they can afford to get a tooth extracted. It is just that critical. And there was already a cost of living crisis.
Right.
So there's real strain in communities. And I think the cost of living is going to be, I think I saw some stats saying it's going to be 50% higher than expected this year. That's just landing so painfully. And we need to see a government that cares. And on that note, did you actually see the Prime Minister during anywhere on the cyclone?
They like to hide him at the moment, don't they?
So we need to see leadership that cares. And we have, and so the unions called out to have a cross-party approach, not to interfere in obviously their big decisions, but to try and advocate for all communities to be seen during this crisis. And it's 2 crises in one community. We've got cyclones, we've got fuel crisis, and they're not separate events. You've got, whānau bearing the cost of a world that's, crazy. And then they're trying to absorb the shock with a government that doesn't seem to have any empathy for them at all.
The reality, whether the right like it or not, is that climate change driven by human pollution is rapidly changing our climate. The modelling tells us that this is now the norm moving forward, and that these storms are only going to get more intense and more damaging. You have released a fascinating renewable energy policy. What is Te Pāti's Māori's response to the climate change challenge?
Look, I think first of all, it's because I'm from Taranaki, and so we're not and was a very active iwi CEO in that space. So we're not out of the loop of what it means when there's a limited amount of companies that are actually able to produce. So we've known for a very long time that we needed to take an active just transition approach. And that what that has to look like is actually not just building, forever corporate companies, but figuring out how we can get households off the grid into some solar, be able to get communities into renewable energy spaces, lower the cost of living, and get it at scale. And I think these are some of the things that smarter people than me are leading by example on how you can run your businesses, how you can run communities. But what we continue to do is sit there and have have corporate views of life that don't bring any extra support to again, the average New Zealanders, those of us who are living on the ground. So, there's some things that we think that the government could do to help. There's some things that they could do to incentivize businesses. I think being able to get finance is really difficult. Being able to take up EVs is really difficult. And so I think that there is a really smart way we can go about it, but we've got a government that's in denial of the extent of the issue and are really stuck on the fossil and fuel model.
Solar panels in every marae?
Absolutely. Solar panels in libraries.
Preach.
I mean, we're seeing it. I mean, government spent $500,000 to get, solar on its building.
Yeah.
Taxpayers paid for that. Why can't we sit there and lead by example and get it out to the communities? And we're really captured by these large corporates that set the price. So the retail, there's absolutely no competition. So it's easily done. But again, they pulled that funding back as well. So I think there's a lot we could be doing a lot better. But continuing off with this old model of reliance on fossil and fuels, and I think that's the hardest part about this, is there's not a conversation on how we can do it at scale and how we help those who could really immediately gain a better quality of life. Because when you're well, you learn. When you learn, you earn.
Finally, Debbie, how should New Zealand be using its voice on the international stage right now?
Oh, the same way that we have in the past, when we stood up for women's rights, when we stood against anti-nuclear, when we led the charge on what it is to be a proud Pacifica nation. I think it doesn't matter. We've seen Spain do it. It doesn't matter how big or how small we are. We are a nation that has prided ourselves in peace.
Right.
And I think has never been about any attacks on civilians. We were too quiet. I mean, we're shameful during Gaza.
Yes.
And in this, we continue to show blind allegiance to, really what seems to be quite an unhinged leader.
Right.
In America, a very unhinged. I mean, he's got the worst public relations team around. I don't know what they must be doing, but long story short, we should be showing who we are as a country.
Yes.
We're a country of big heart that looks after people, that's multicultural. We know what it's like to come through some pretty hard times, including colonization. We land on our feet and we show what it is to lead by example, a peaceful nation, a respectful, dignified nation. And that's what we should be taking. We don't even know what the conversations are that they're having because there's no transparency around it. So I think, we certainly don't want to be looking like we're shoulder buddies with Israel and America. We should be leading by example, as small as we are.
Thank you, comrade. We'll again talk to you next month.
Anytime. Ka kite.
Cheers. The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but now this week's extra 1-on-1 in 10 with former intelligence and defense policy analyst and consultant to US government security agencies, Dr. Paul Buchanan, on Trump's illegal war on Iran, Israel's role, and if this represents a terrible geopolitical blunder. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Tanakwa, Martin. Good to see you.
Dear Dr. Buchanan, you co-host one of the best geopolitical podcasts alongside the brilliant Selwyn Manning. The podcast is called A View from Afar. We are delighted to have you on the show tonight. Paul, Netanyahu has been claiming Iran was about to build a nuclear bomb since 1992, and no American administration over those 40 years was dumb enough to follow Israel into attacking Iran, because every time the CIA and military war gamed this out, it ended in a lose-lose-lose quagmire. Are we witnessing one of the worst geopolitical blunders since America invaded Vietnam?
Short answer is yes, but let me speak in twos, because the multiple of twos is what matters here. The precipitant to this war was what you might call a double wag the dog scenario.
Yeah.
And that is Trump needed to divert attention from Epstein,
yes,
from ICE, from the backlash to the tariff policies. Let's put it this way. His domestic policies have by and large been a disaster.
Right.
And he's getting a lot, and it's an election year. It's a midterm election year. So keep this in mind. That's the time end for the United States. They got to wrap anything up well before those elections, which quite frankly, they're going to lose. And not only because of this war, but because of all the other stuff ups. Now, he needed the diversion.
Yep.
So he wags the dog with this war of aggression against Iran. And as you just said, they've been barking about the Iranian nuclear program forever. I have a background in nuclear strategy. I could tell you for hours why they weren't anything. Remember Netanyahu with his little bomb at the UN?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so there was that sort of ridiculousness. Now, the bigger issue is this. Netanyahu also had to wag the dog. This is a guy who has been indicted and would be on trial for fraud if it wasn't for the fact that he's a prime minister in a state of national emergency.
Right.
He's got to keep the wars going to keep himself out of court. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but there are rumors that there is something known as the Greater Israel Project.
Yes.
And basically what that means is that Israel has to expand its borders and occupy Palestine as a form of Lebensraum, which is what the Germans thought of living space.
Right.
The Russians use it too. And let's remember, there's a lot of Russians living in Israel as settlers.
Right.
So their geopolitical thought has started to come into Netanyahu's reasoning. And the idea is, look, October 7th gave us the excuse. Now let's move because we have the moment of opportunity to take Gaza, to take the West Bank, to take southern Syria, but we can't take Iran without the United States.
Right.
So you get the fools in the West Wing, Hegseth and Trump in particular, you whisper sweet nothings in their ear about nukes and ayatollahs and convince them, and this is a truly incredible thing for me, having written about authoritarian regime change extensively in my academic life.
That's right.
They convinced him that you could decapitate the ayatollahs and somehow democracy will come out of the end of that. Maybe they thought it would be like Venezuela, but even Venezuela is not going the way they think.
Sure.
My point being is that this was a double wag the dog scenario, so it was totally opportunistic. It wasn't existential, although Israel has its own agenda. See, the Yanks are just about taking the moment to divert from domestic politics. Israel's got a bigger project. And we'll see now if paths are about to diverge, because this thing is starting to hit the fan.
Iran's only red line, their only red line in all of this was not to kill their holy man. Israel and Trump's opening move after bombing a school, killing 165 schoolgirls, was to kill the Ayatollah. Didn't that assassination manifest this immediately into an existential threat for the theocracy?
Oh, it's a good point. I mean, the fact of the matter is, well, let me back up. The Persian culture, right? Iran is 80% Persian.
Yep.
The Persian culture is 6,000 years old. And even though it seems trite to say, they invented chess and Persian carpet weaving. Now, you may say, what does that have to do with the price of anything? The point is this: a culture that produces such things as chess and intricate carpets has infinite patience, prepares well, can think 3 or 4 moves down the road, has lateral thinking, and it's confronted by a U.S. society or a U.S. government that is instant gratification, believes in weapons porn, likes to see the imagery, but not the reality, wants it all over yesterday. And so you walk into this thinking that killing the Ayatollah and his major commanders would somehow result in regime change. I mean, I hear that Trump doesn't drink, but he's got to be high. And then Hegseth, we know he drinks. So, this crowd is operating in a different reality. And here's the bottom line. This is the greatest strategic blunder of the United States, arguably since Vietnam, but certainly since W. Bush invaded Iraq under false pretenses. But more importantly, and this is the core, it is the end, it's the death rattle of the liberal international order.
Wow.
Why?
Wow.
Because the liberal international order was based on 2 pillars, security and trade.
Yes.
And those pillars were centered on American guarantees.
Yeah.
The world trade system was based on the U.S. as its core, and the Western security system was based as the U.S. as the guarantor of things like freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah.
What this war has proven is that the U.S. can do neither. The U.S. is not a good security ally. Ask the Arab oligarchies that are supposedly under the U.S. umbrella. They're getting bombed.
Yeah.
And then ask the system of trade. The fact is the Iranians didn't close the Strait of Hormuz. They put in a toll booth.
Yeah.
And they said, look, as long as you're not involved with bombing us, please come on in. We'll charge you for the pleasure. So I think what we have here is the mother, to use that phrase, the mother of own goals. And quite frankly, to my liking, it's all for the good.
Was the biggest danger from Trump's illegal kidnapping of the Venezuelan president the belief that he could pull the same stunt in Iran?
Well, the only danger was to himself and the other deluded minions who thought that Venezuela was somehow like Iran. That Venezuela, the people who have to worry actually are the Cubans because they're smaller and much closer to the States.
Yeah.
But this is the same saber rattling, sometimes put into practice, that he was using on Greenland.
Yes.
The guy, they have this historical ignorance that truly defies the imagination for those who have worked in government. And let's be frank, Venezuela, they took out a dictator who was a fairly soft dictator, to be honest, compared to many others that the U.S. supports, by the way. Yes. And his wife. They took out his wife.
Yeah.
They didn't take anyone else out because they thought they could cut a deal.
Right.
Especially about oil, where they're not going to cut any deals with the Iranians.
Do you believe that Trump cares about democracy in Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba, or was he wanting a cheap trifecta of America's enemies to parade like a victorious Caesar for the midterms?
I would say the latter. I don't think he cares about democracy at all, and the proof is what he does at home. This is not a guy who believes in democracy. He believes in power. And this is the game. He's a bully. Okay, this is an intimidation game of actually the crudest sort. And I guess the upside to this is that not just in Europe, unfortunately, I can't say here, given the current leadership, but people will realize the U.S. has become a paper tiger under the Trump administration. The Iranians have said as much. The Chinese are winking and nodding. I mean, the Chinese and Russians, this is manna from heaven for them.
Right. They're the biggest winners, aren't they?
The U.S., I've said for years, the U.S. will not be destroyed from without. It will be destroyed from within, even though it may take an external precipitant to bring it crumbling down. We are watching it.
Finally, Paul, you have been light years ahead of almost every other commentator on this issue. What do you think happens next?
Well, the best thing that can happen for the United States, and remember, my loyalties now are very divided. I'm a New Zealand citizen. I don't want to go back there anytime soon. The U.S., the best thing the U.S. can do is what they should have done in Iraq right after the fall of Saddam, which is declare victory and beat feet back home.
Right.
The difference being there's a midterm coming. He's destroying the Republican Party over this. MAGA has fractured.
Yes.
You got the neo-Nazis and anti-Semites against the so-called GOP globalists. Anyway, they're in disarray. And all the spin the corporate media may want to throw on this from the right doesn't disguise the fact that these guys are in ruins.
Right.
And then run by someone who is clearly not mentis competus at the top. So that doesn't mean to say the Democrats are going to take advantage of this, because the Democrats, much like the Labor Party, are very good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. So we'll see how they do in November, but it's for them to lose.
Thank you, comrade, for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. We'll talk again soon. Cheers, Paul. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the taxpayers' union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location, for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Hyper. You know, it was 1 week ago. We were talking here at the Bradbury Group, and we were waiting for Trump's deadline to arrive.
Yes, we were.
And at that time, he hadn't made his threat to destroy the civilization of Iran. That was less than a week ago. And then, of course, there was the ceasefire.
Yep.
The bizarre ceasefire that wasn't. And then there was the talks in Pakistan. I mean, J.D. Vance has flown to Pakistan, negotiated for 21 hours and flown back to Washington in the time that we were talking. And now we've got the blockade. And now we've got talk of there needing to be further land attacks by the US and Israel to open. So it's just been the most incredible week in terms of history speeding up. So hyper.
Our next panellist hails from the mighty South Auckland. She's a cross between Jeremy Corbyn, Greta Thunberg and Mighty Mouse. Labour Party spokesperson for commerce, consumer affairs, building, construction and youth. It's the member for Manurewa, Arena Williams. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
It's everywhere. People are talking about it in everything. It is absolutely obliterating every other political issue, and the government is nowhere on it.
Preach. And last but certainly not least, she's the fresh-faced political voice standing against the calcified tribal hate of left versus right, coming from the radical centre, leader of the Opportunities Party, the mighty Qiulae Wong. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome back to the show. One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Ambition. I think there have been times in history when we can bumble along and that's okay, and there are times when we need to make big moves, and I think this is one of those moments where we need to be more ambitious for New Zealand.
Preach. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, week 7 of Trump's illegal war on Iran, and what would 7.5% inflation do to our economy? Issue 2, another extreme climate event. Are we doing enough to prepare for what is coming? And issue 3 tonight, what should replace the BSA if Goldsmith kills it? Plus, we'll have final word at the end of the show. Which panelist gets to get to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week? My money is on Arena. Let's kick things off with issue 1, and that is week 7 of Trump's illegal war against Iran. And with the straits still closed, the inflationary impact of this miscalculation has reached terrifying new levels, with Treasury now forecasting New Zealand's inflation rate could rise as high as 7.5%, which is well above the Reserve Bank's current forecast of 4.2% and staggeringly higher than the 3.7% worst-case scenario disclosed last month by Finance Minister Nicola Willis. Matthew, our new Nordic Ice Queen Reserve Bank governor, with the steely gaze and glacial melt in her veins, can look down the barrel of the camera as many times as she likes to tell the market that she will look through this inflation spike. But how the risen zombie Christ do you look through 7.5% inflation?
Well, I don't think she is going to look through it, and nor do increasing numbers of the bank economists. I think she's made of sterner stuff than Adrian Orr. I think she knows that 7.5% inflation would be a complete disaster for New Zealand, especially seeing we got to 7.3% back in June 2022. So we know exactly what it means, but if it happened twice in 4 years would make it worse. And of course, not least, she would be outside her contract with the government. So I think that's a forecast. All economic forecasts should be wrong, because the point of economic forecasts is to inform policymakers. And in this case, the Reserve Bank should respond, as the ANZ is suggesting, by a series of interest rate increases at all of the next 3 meetings of the Monetary Policy Committee, and that will stop that from happening.
Okay, let's get into that. Follow-up question. To counter the 7.3% inflation rate during COVID, the Reserve Bank lifted the OCR from 2.25 to 5.5. We would need to jump 1 full point for 3 consecutive rate raises this year alone to chase 7.5. What would jumping from 2.25 to 5.25 this year do to the economy and the government's re-election chances?
Well, that's the whole point. The Reserve Bank must not let it reach 7.5% or anything like it, the way that the previous governor and his crew allowed it to reach that point. In fact, what the ANZ says, it believes that if there are these 3 rate hikes this year, then perhaps the official cash rate will be able to max out at only 3% and keep inflation low. So I think they should move hard, they should move early, and they shouldn't make the same mistakes that were made after COVID. Look how terrible it was. I mean, inflation's got to be the one thing that everybody agrees is terrible. It's bad for people on fixed incomes like beneficiaries, like superannuitants. It's bad for workers on wages. It's bad for capitalists who are trying to play in investments. And despite what some people on the political left try to argue, you can't buy lower unemployment with a little bit of inflation. It doesn't work that way. After we had high inflation, unemployment will always go up. So we need to defeat this. And we know what happens politically if you reach 7.3%. I mean, that led to one of the most popular prime ministers we'd ever had, Jacinda Ardern. Within 6 months after inflation reaching that point, she resigned because of that's what it does to government's popularities.
Arena, not one single working class person in your electorate had any hand in starting this stupid war. No. Why should the working classes of New Zealand have to pay for a blunder they didn't cause?
Yeah, and it's getting them twice, right? Because not only are they paying more at the pump, they're also paying more for their food, and they will see continuous increases in the prices of goods that they pay for. And to Matthew's point, politically it also means that governments can't borrow more. So even as my constituents are coming to me and saying we've got to be responding to this, only a tiny proportion of the population is eligible for the government's meagre increase to working for families, it will get harder and harder if our Reserve Bank doesn't respond hard for government to continue to support these people. So we need to look at other solutions. Firstly, how are those the fuel importers into New Zealand, which is a market that is a high degree of entrenched market power, passing on those price increases to consumers and not wearing the other side of those cost increases and passing savings on. How are we making sure that food prices aren't increasing beyond reasonable levels? How are we making sure that those working people are getting a fair go in what is a crisis that will continue to impact the New Zealand economy for far longer than the fuel price shock remains?
Follow-up question, what are some of the stories you are hearing from your community in South Auckland over the choices that they are having to make between paying the bills and actually paying the bloody fuel price?
It's terrible. I talked to some care and support workers just this week. These are the women who look after our elderly whānau kaumātua, our disabled families in South Auckland.
Heroes.
Absolutely. Worth every dollar we pay them, and yet the government has only made a meagre increase to some of their fuel support. They are dipping into their family food budgets to pay for that because they care about these people. They're always going to do that work because the people that they go and see in their homes desperately need them to show up, to put their socks on, to have a shower. So they're always going to go. And yet these are the people who are worst off in this crisis because they also won't be getting a pay rise this year. They're also looking down the barrel of bargaining rounds this year. Well, they will not be getting an increase above inflation. They will not even be getting any extra hours and overtime. Some of these care and support workers aren't being paid the extra hours that they would usually get because everyone is cutting back on those costs.
Qiulae, in response to this fuel crisis, TOP have called for permanent free public transport. Tell us about it. Preach!
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of going back to my point earlier around ambition and the moments for big moves. We've always thought that the economic stacks up, and I guess now is the time to, it really stacks up even more. And I think that the same goes for lots of other things that we can talk about. Things like the cost of living and inflation are just the straw that is breaking the camel's back at the moment. We are living in creaky economic systems all over the place. Our energy system is broken. Our supermarket competition is broken. Insurance is going up because we're not taking action on climate change. With weather events are proving that. So every time there's some sort of global crisis, which seems to be more and more these days, we're just we're so fragile, and so we need to make some of these big changes, like free public transport, but lots of other things as well, so that we actually set ourselves up to be more resilient in the next 30 to 50 years.
Follow-up question. Trump made his most recent statement on the geopolitical tensions with Iran during a DoorDash McDonald's drop-off at the White House. How far away from normal are we with this White House?
Well,
I did not have on my bingo card, a discussion of geopolitical war that I just started while I'm taking my McDonald's at the White House front door. Wasn't on my bingo card.
I think we have become so desensitized to all of that now. And I think that's why we have to focus on what we can do here in New Zealand to be a resilient country for the long term. Yes, we have to do immediate things to fix and to protect people in the short term. But if we don't look ahead, then we're just going to be subject and the recipient of all of this craziness which is happening around the world.
Quick round. What happens if America boards a Chinese ship by force during this blockade? Matthew Hooton.
I think that the American and Chinese militaries are sophisticated enough people that they would work through that. I also think the president of China is a sophisticated enough person that he would encourage the two militaries to have dialogue. And I think those three players would resolve it without it leading to a nuclear war.
Thank Jesus. Arena?
New Zealand must play its role as a small nation which benefits from rules within an international legal system. We need to be the nation out there calling for peace. We're not right now.
Qiulae?
Yeah, I think fully agree. We need to be calling for peace. That's the role that we play. We're dependent on everyone following the rules in this world.
Comrades, you need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is another extreme climate event that has ripped through the country as the planet records staggeringly high new global temperature records. Arena, the government cut almost $22 million from the civil defence budget last year while slashing EV subsidies, gutting the $6 billion climate resilience fund Labor created, and dumped meaningful methane targets. We can't blame this government climate change, but we can blame them for doing sweet bugger all, can't we?
For our preparedness. And it's all of us that are affected by this. Around 14% of New Zealanders are living in floodplains.
That blows my mind. I don't understand
we
that.
We have created a system where so many people are reliant on central government and local government to take a leadership role and come up with a system which benefits all of us. Other countries around the world can do this. France, Germany, they have different approaches, but the thing that is clear to me is that all of the OECD nations that we like to compare ourselves to have gone further than we have in terms of not only a planning system which delivers for people, but an insurance system which actually ensures that it's not always the little guy, the grandmother who has saved for her house and that's her only life savings, or the new couple who are the first home buyers saving desperately, who are going to bear the worst of the costs of this.
Yeah. Qiulae, the issue isn't the left. We want to take climate change seriously, but the right refuse point blank to hold their big polluter donors to account. How can TOP push National away from their addiction to dairy farmers?
I think by pointing out the opportunity of the situation. The Sustainable Business Council recently put out a report that estimated we could grow our economy by $22 billion a year by 2035 if we invest in sustainable business now.
Right.
There are so many opportunities that we are leaving on the table, and I think that's the way to bring the likes of National along.
Matthew, over the last week, I've heard every government minister fronting on the storm, thanking Kiwis for being prepared and resilient without needing any government aid. Is this new narrative shift a move by the political right to create the cultural acceptance that we can't rely on the state for any help during climate change events, which their policies are exacerbating?
Well, I don't think it's a right-wing thing. I think that if there were 1 in 100-year events, then governments could borrow and help people through those events if they happen once every 100 years. But if once in 100-year events are going to happen every year, it's just a simple fact that the government, I mean, it could be a communist government, it doesn't make any difference. It's just not going to have the resources to fix
not with that
everything
attitude.
every single year, right? So it's not going to happen. I mean, the big thing is that perhaps only someone like TOP or the Greens or ACT would be prepared to talk about, certainly not National Labour. There are parts of New Zealand, we're an underpopulated country, low population density. There are parts of New Zealand which are struggling economically and always have to be viable, which have poor transport links, which cannot remain viable except at the cost of just tens and tens of billions of dollars. And we're going to have a discussion about whether, we do repair the roads into those areas.
Arena wants to have a discussion right now.
My hands are up.
Okay.
My hands are up, Hooton.
It'd be good if you do. It'd be good if you do have something to say about it. It's Labour areas, largely. Yeah.
We should be able to agree from a bipartisan standpoint that the mayors who have written Chris Bishop and said open State Highway 2, it is a critical link of infrastructure through the Waiawika Gorge for the region that produces the food.
Yeah.
This is what we need for New Zealand right now in a fuel crisis and in any situation where our resilience is on the line. I mean, the Prime Minister's out there touting that he's negotiating with Singapore, after Albanese did the same, that we have food to give to the world in a fuel crisis that we will exchange for critical goods. If we cut off our supply chains by not repairing those critical infrastructure routes that we have always used for that, how are we going to be able as a small country to get the things that we need from the rest of the world?
You're talking about the road around the coast from Whakatane.
The Waiawika Gorge into Gisborne is the internal route. It is also the name of my daughter and is an important route to me.
State Highway 2.
Well, if it's going to be destroyed every year, it simply isn't a viable road, is it?
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is what should replace Broadcasting Standards Association if Broadcasting Minister Goldsmith kills it. Qiulae, we live in an age of disinformation and misinformation. Don't we need more broadcasting standards, not less?
Yeah, I think we need to think about what is the purpose and role of, and what is broadcasting. Broadcasting in the old sense of everyone sitting around a radio or a television is gone. Everybody consumes their news on demand through social media, and we need to look at how those platforms are monetizing, how they are, stealing people's attention, the responsibility for misinformation and disinformation. So those, I think, need to make up the substantive, framework of that legislation going forward. And I think that includes the likes of YouTube and social media platforms.
Yeah, Matthew, this debate is being driven by the BSA against Sean Plunkett. Is Sean a broadcaster? And as such, should he be covered by the BSA?
Oh, look, it's just a definitional thing. I think what we have these two institutions, the Press Council, which I have had a few successes in, I must say, over the decades, and the Broadcasting Standards Authority. I mean, they were built for a different age. They are kind of quasi-judicial. They take themselves very seriously. They take months to get a result. Yep. Often it's, by the time you get the result, it's not worth getting the result because events have moved on. I hate to use this, but in yachting, it used to be that the only way you could appeal was at the end of the race to the jury. And there might have been some small infringement early in the race and nothing could be done about it. till you went to the quasi-judicial jury, and then that was just ridiculous. And so the speedboats that go behind the boats, and if someone breaks the rules, there's a quick judgment. I think we need something more nimble, something that does cover everything, but doesn't sort of pretend it's a court and issues rulings pretty quickly, like within 24 hours, almost like sort of a fact checker. Because the media world is just so dynamic that having these old-fashioned sort of semi-courts just isn't suitable anymore.
Araina, a democracy is healthy when the voters are informed by a functioning fourth estate. If voters are being fed social media conspiracy theory garbage, the democracy rots. What should replace BSA if Goldie kills it?
Yeah, I'm interested in, no one in this room is going to go out and defend the BSA's current structure, but why is Paul Goldsmith suggesting that we get rid of it? You have to be pretty sceptical when there are currently issues before it that involve political commentary where he might not like the ideas that are coming out of the BSA, which is independent from politicians, and the very reason why we have those bodies that are not involved with politics or the media is so they can be independent. You do need a quick decision maker, as Matthew says, but you also need one that people can have trust in. This is all about a system where people can buy into paying a bit to get a news which is independent and is verifiable. And as Qiulae says, a lot of people get their media through social media right now, but a lot of those clips that people see are actually produced by New Zealand news coverage. They are verifiable, and the reason you might take a clip from the news and then make commentary about it is because that is true and because it has standards that can be enforced, and people buy into that level of trust in our democracy, and we need that. I have no faith that the way this has been done is going to get us something better. I've gone and met with the BSA. They are a small group. They do important work, and we should not break it if it's not broken.
Quick round. What's the most important journalistic value, Matthew Hooton?
The most important journalistic value.
Yes.
Trying to maintain an audience, effectively maintaining an audience in order to provide a rough factual account of what's going on. But the two are linked. You can't have one without the other.
Qiulae?
Yeah, I was going to say verifying sources, integrity.
Araina?
Yeah, trust. Building and cultivating a sense that if you're sometimes going to take a view, but that people know where you're coming from.
You're all 50% wrong. The most important journalistic integrity values that we should be promoting is the right of reply, free speech, whistleblower protections, protecting sources, right? Actually having journalistic privilege so you don't have to hand everything over to the cops. Those are the sorts of values that we need.
You're not just a pretty face, Bomber.
I do what I can. I've been up against it for years, brother. Comrades, we need to wrap the show with the final word. Araina, your final word, please.
I've been thinking about the way that we need governments around the world to show citizens that they are acting for them in these times of crises, and that they will rebalance power between corporates who control supply chains and will make profit out of this crisis. We need to show people that governments are capable of that kind of contract, that it's not using government as a tool to do your clever policy, but it's about the social contract that we have with each other. States can only be as powerful as their citizens give them power, and that is what we need to restore, because the alternative is guys who answer the Uber Eats order and give us a geopolitics update that is part of the most dangerous times that we have ever lived through in my generation.
Preach, future leader of the Labour Party, ladies and gentlemen. Qiulae, your final word, please, ma'am.
I have been thinking a lot about how we need to activate the silent majority.
Amen.
Because I think if we're going to enable that ambition that I so really want us to have for New Zealand, the silent majority need to be heard and to push that through.
Matthew, your final word this week, please, sir.
Interested in both ACT and New Zealand First appear to have some pretty good candidates from their perspective coming through. James Christmas, who's been headhunted from National by ACT, and will bring, I hope, a more intelligent view to some of the constitutional issues than ACT's been capable of recently, but we'll see. And there's reports that Tane Randall, the former All Black captain, is going to be running for New Zealand First. Now, I just compare that with National's recent candidate selections, and the same can be said about the political left, with the big party recycling former parliamentary staffers, people who are safe pairs of hands who don't have a political idea or a rebellious thought or an innovative thought in their whole lives. And the two coalition partners, for better or worse, are going out and getting people who are wanting to run for Parliament. I think because in Tane Randall and James Christmas's case, they understand that New Zealand really is at the end of the road and people have to step up if they care.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word, brothers and sisters. Every time you get punched in the wallet as you pay for the fuel crisis, it's because of Trump. He has led America into its worst geopolitical blunder since Vietnam, and he can't get out. He has gotten away with the arrogance to believe he could launch this war on Iran because of the lack of criticism from the West. Let's be clear. National, ACT and New Zealand First have helped enable this. They have refused point blank to criticise and challenge Trump. Indeed, they have sucked up to him. Winston met with Rubio hours before Trump backed down on his promise to commit genocide against a 7,000-year-old civilization. Imagine if instead of grovelling to the Yanks, Winston had admonished them and called on them to stand up for the values we have previously respected them for. Winston would have been the last world leader America had met before Trump called the strike off. Winston would have been celebrated as a global statesman instead of a cowardly goon. As you continue to feel that pain in your wallet, as the unemployment rate jumps, as inflation spikes, as we see the impact and riots driven by this blockade erupt throughout Asia, as the everyday becomes impossible, blame the politicians in this country who sucked up to Trump and enabled his arrogance with our silence. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small wetter in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.